you know, kick us out a bid, tell us where we are, or how we're gonna do this. But, you know, I've got emails and phone calls in from people that says, hey, we're just so busy. And if you go and look, other utilities have 4 contractors working, some have 6, 7 working, just utilities right next to us. I mean, they're just all, you know, this whole area has contractors being all over the place and working on that. So this is taking a little bit longer than we expected. We're a little bit delayed on that to begin with because of the rerouting, because we didn't have easements. We had to go back to redesign. And then that last little part coming out of the substation, remember, we were coming down the road and then making a 90. We never could get an easement on the last person, so we had to redesign again and reroute and get different easements going back through a different area to serve that. I believe Drew mentioned yesterday they were about finished.
They're just sealing it.
With the last changes. So every time there's a change, the engineering company has to go back and redesign it and then reseal it and do all this, because all these things have to be sealed by the engineering company. So, you know, we would have been delayed and delayed. So material is still being ordered. We just signed off on some poles, I guess, last week for this project. So, you know, we're still moving everything forward, getting all the poles, getting all the stuff in for this moving forward. It's just that we do not have a contractor on hand yet. So still working on that aspect. Community solar, it's kind of strange because we had to rush for the PPA, what was that, 2 months ago? Remember, we did the approval really, you know, before it was 100%. So we have attorneys going back and forth on a few verbiage on, what was it, oh, you weren't on that call. Yeah, you were, on 2 points.
Yes.
There's 2 points that NextEra, our attorney, they're going back and forth on. We think we can work on one. We're trying to, you know, wheel and deal to get those 2 little points out. It's kind of like, it's 2 points that me, I don't know how much it really affects of where we are, but there's 2 points of interest between the two, you know, us and them, and this PPA would be moving forward. The price is still where we talked about, but the verbiage of the contract, there's a couple of things in there that they're still working on. So that is still trying to move forward on that aspect. Inventory levels, we're still there. We kind of worked on that. We just are looking at what's being used. Marcy got a new list of some things a different department doesn't use. It has a lot of things that we can just write off and everything else. So we're still looking at that also. Facilities, we're still holding the conference calls with Cooperative Building Solutions on a regular basis. They have done the conceptual facility plans, which you have seen. Now they have broken that down into departments. So, you know, they're showing now this part of the building would be this department, that department, the hard area for, you know, dispatch for this. They're showing the design a little bit tighter now. We're to that. So we're still moving forward with that. They will be here next week, 2 weeks, and meeting with Marcy and I. We're going to be covering that, and then they're going to start drilling that down a little bit more on the design of how that would look inside of those departments. And then once we get that, we will be able to present and show you that on that aspect. Right now, it's just still the same box, and they have a little line here. This would be this, 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 this. So the next time after we meet, and the architect gets to do a little bit of his sketching a little bit more, he should have it drawn out a little bit more that is on there.
Since they're coming to us pretty soon with that, I had, in talking with the commissioners in this area, well, the commissioners from the county, they said that that back part of that property floods. Are we addressing that in all the, and I'd like to see what the proposal is to work on that flooding on the back part of that property.
There is a study going on that was part of this. They had to mitigate that to begin with. That is by law, they have to do that, so they're already doing that. And once that is finished, we'll do that, but that's in this next stage.
Yeah, that was what y'all approved the last time we asked you. I think that
Yeah,
25
that additional
or 30
25
was
for
for
the
that,
mitigation
for the
of
flood
the-
study, but we haven't received any results yet.
Yeah. So what
Is that expected pretty soon?
It's in the next few months. I don't know when
Yeah, I
that would be
don't
done.
know that we got,
Yeah.
I didn't get a.
Because it's after they finish this diagram, when they look at how much the concrete is, how much of the asphalt is, and how much water that would push down of what that is. So that has to be after they do the facility of what that runoff would be downstream of that. So that has already been approved to be studied. Like I said, that was in y'all's last vote. What was it, 20 or 25,000 just
I think
to,
it's
for
25,
that?
and we talked to TxDOT about what they encounter, and they don't really encounter, I mean, they encounter, you know, a lot of stuff. But
They just get soggy, they
It
don't
just gets
have water.
soggy, yeah, they said they're really heavy trucks, they can't drive on there, but they're smaller trucks, they can, so
That's
it's
way in the
not,
back down that hill.
yeah.
Yeah. So, the next step on this is that once the papers come here, because we've closed on the property, we're waiting for all the documentation to come in. Once that comes in, we will approach the city of Floresville, since that has been annexed, and we will switch that zoning over to commercial, because they have it as commercial. Since we purchased under residential, we need to go to them and just do 2 committee meetings with them to move that over. The city manager said it's no big deal, it won't take hardly any time, because that's what their goal is to move that to commercial anyway. And that property will then be rezoned as a commercial piece of property. So that's our next step. Once we get the documents in, I'll go over, or Marcy and I will go over whichever one and do that presentation to that committee, or that little team that does the changing of the zoning committee. We would do that and take care of that. So like I said, we had to have the documentations, the legal closing documents, we don't have those yet. Yes,
Mr.
ma'am.
Lowe, the zoning commission typically has to have residents' approval to have that rezoned. Is that being done?
On that, she just told us we had to take that in since that was there. We'll get with with the city manager again, what all we have to bring over and present over there.
Thank you.
Okay. And then let's see, the schedule, so that's where we are there on the facilities. The vehicles, we still have that list. We have not started disposing of any of them. We were talking about how, and if we're gonna do partial, instead of doing all of them at one time, it'd be easier for us to make small groups a couple of times, and then, I guess, what was you said, Claudia would be posting and doing?
Claudia handles that, so it's really hard for her to do a lot of vehicles at once, for her to manage all the questions coming in. It's better to do just a handful at a time.
So that's still moving forward. So we're trying to lower that vehicle level a little bit. We're also looking at the inventory levels, bringing them down. So those are the other projects. The last one is vegetation management is still going. We're still working the 2 crews. One of them is still in Bentwood. We're hoping that should be coming finished pretty
Very,
quick.
very bad.
And we need to get our eyes on that to see how much more they have to do in the Bentwood area. And then the other crew is still here in Floresville city limits. And that is all I have on the projects.
Review of upcoming agenda items. Anything we need to be aware of for next month?
Next month, the meeting is scheduled for the day before Thanksgiving. Typically, y'all move it back a week, but because we have to meet on November 20th for the bonds, would y'all be open to moving it to the 20th, a week earlier, instead of a week later? Or we can have 2 meetings, whatever y'all prefer.
The
Thanksgiving's the
28th.
28th.
So we move it the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, so we have a day before,
Yes,
so
sir.
you can
The
travel
20th.
or.
Yes, sir.
I'm fine with the 20th. Does anybody got anything against the 20th?
So-
What should be the,
So on that, the reason we kind of chose that day also to move it up to, we are looking at doing our holiday get-together on that day also, so it would be a pretty good thing that y'all can transition over to that if y'all wanted to after the meeting.
Do I have to dress up?
Like
Santa
Santa.
You asked, you asked.
I'm sorry, so the day of the November
I'll be
meeting
at
is
Elf.
it'd be
when?
November 20th.
20th.
I can be an elf.
So there won't be any on the 27th.
Correct.
That's correct, we're just gonna move it up 1 week, is what we're asking.
Okay, any board members got any requests for upcoming agenda items?
Not at the moment.
Okay. Review the generation and transmission factor for the month.
Mark, do you need me to stay for a quorum, or can I take off to go to work?
You can go.
Okay, okay.
We
We're
got,
good?
we got 3.
Okay.
So,
Go ahead.
All right.
and where were we, generation? So Marcia, we talked about moving that, correct? To
In
7?
November, we're gonna move it to .075.
Yeah. So November, after studying and everything else, for October, we're still looking at the .09, still on the generation transmission.
.069.
I mean .069. So we're still looking at that number for October, just to let you know. We're looking at November, that change needs to occur. It was recommended that we go up to 0.75.
Correct.
0.75, so you will see a change starting on the November bills of the G&T charge going up to the 0.75 instead of 0.069. We told you there would be a change, coming eventually, and that's when it has been recommended for that change is at the November. So October, 0.069, November, 0.75.
Okay. Review the minutes of the Safe Work Practices Staff Committee meeting for the month of September 2019.
They met September 10th. So let's see what occurred. They still investigate. They were looking at. Excuse me. They're looking at buildings and stuff about how safe they are, what needs to be done, and they reviewed the operation engineering building, and they inspected it, so they have written down some of the issues that were there. So some of the things on here, like what we talked about, is stuff that we can fix lightly. If it's major stuff, since we're looking at new facilities, we weren't going to invest a lot of money into some of the stuff that needs to be there. So the coating for no slips and all of that stuff, we did all of that because that needed to be taken care of. The ramps and everything else were repainted with the no slip and all the safety signs and all of that aspect. So most of this stuff was taken out. So that's the building aspect. So the incident, accident review, a vehicle struck an object. It was truck 696. It was a corner post of a fence line. Post was obstructed by vegetation. The committee recommendation is to remind the employees of everyone that what we're supposed to be doing is walking around the vehicle, doing the 360, checking in front of the vehicles and behind it before you start moving them. So that was the committee recommendation on this incident. Near miss, unsafe act, condition 822, large truck was turning onto the roadway from an alley. The truck, contacted a trash can. Trash can was in the truck's blind spot and not visible to the driver. Again, committee recommendation, be more vigilant when driving in tight areas, use your blind spot mirrors. So, other than that, that was all that they have for that time period.
All right, outages for the month.
Wasn't there another one on that?
The trash cans.
That little dog?
Not a little dog.
Dog, I just
So,
That over a
The
little
dog.
dog, what?
No, the dog got inside the.
dog bit.
That is not on my writing, but they should have discussed, I don't know if that came in, that probably goes in the next month. Yeah, that was after the meeting. We can go ahead and talk about that. That was after the meeting, so that's why it wasn't on the report. That should be into the next month's thing, an incident report. So we had an employee that went up to the house to do a meter change out when the owner, this is kind of funny because the individual laughed at it. It was a lap dog, and the owner opened the door and the lap dog decided to come up at the person and grabbed a hold in the thigh area
Whoa.
of the employee.
Gardo.
Yeah. So that was just the incident that occurred there. Like I said, this should have been on the next month's, but it was thrown in here on this one. But that's what that was. It was just happened to be going up to the owner's house. And that dog was inside the house, and when the owner opened the house, it came out and grabbed a hold of the employee. So the employee was okay. He did check, make sure there was no
I
barking.
was running, doing the mail route out in Brentwood. Had a package,
yeah.
lady came to get her package, and the dog jumped up.
I just thought it was information.
Lady thought it was cute.
Yeah.
That ain't cute, lady.
Okay, outages for the month.
All right, outages for the month. Excuse me. So there's a couple of them that were over that threshold we kind of talk about. So on October the 3rd, we've discussed this one. There was a large garbage dumpster truck that hit a communication line and it broke our poles in that aspect. So on that number of consumers that affected by that outage was 604 that were out on that. You have to remember, we talked about what they decided to do. They did do some switching on that, and they picked up some of the people, so they picked up about half of them. So about 300 ended up out for a little bit longer on some of that aspect of what we're looking at. So they did do a little bit of movement on that. So there again, that was due to a communication line that's on our system. What we talked about before is when our poles are here in communications, it's down low in that aspect, they still affect our system. So like I said, that dumpster truck hit somebody else's equipment, which caused us damage on our system. So the other fairly large one was on October the 6th. It affected 57 customers. We had EC80 was opened up to repair a down phase due to a dozer hitting guy wire, which messed up some of our system. He was cleaning his right of way, or trying to clean the fence line from my understanding. I've been speaking with him, but that was due to heat.
Where was this one?
This one was on County Road 128.
Person, a farmer got, doing his own property.
Yes. Yeah. So, the other one that's on here is not a large one, but I just want to mention it. We had on October the 11th, blown takeoff fuse due to a limb on the power line. So trees into our system caused an outage affecting 25 customers. So on the 13th of October, damaged insulator center phase that had to be replaced. Reclosure FS8990 was open, so that affected 759 customers. You worked that one, didn't you? Do you remember? That's a long time ago. That was more than yesterday. Yeah, so when that center insulator phase had to be replaced, it was the North Crest subdivision. I'm thinking you probably worked. I was thinking you worked that one, but that had a large number of customers on that just to be able to do that. It was during all those that storm that came through on the 13th and all of that stuff. It was a rainy day when that little front or something that came through. So that's your other one. You still had another blown fuse back on the 23rd. That affected 50. And then the last one, which on the 26th of October, blown fuse due to a squirrel and tripped the RO pole, that was on a one-shot due to construction. That affected 947. I can ask this question. So normally, shouldn't that, at the end of the day, probably gone back to normal operation? And then you put it back on one shot when you came back to work the next day, to when you finish that job, or do y'all leave it on one shot?
On the same day, after you finish the work.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You go back.
So, this outage occurred at 6:02 in the evening. Y'all probably weren't working then, were you? You were probably done. So I guess the crew forgot to put that back on. Not you, it wasn't you, but it's probably forgot to be put back on to normal operation is why it was still on one shot. Because you don't leave it on one shot overnight,
No,
do you?
don't.
Yeah. So I'm thinking that was probably due to we didn't get that back onto the normal operation, which occurs.
Where? What's this at?
603 2nd Street.
6th Street, that's by my house.
You did.
Because I was not working at that time.
Yeah, it
No.
says on the 26th, yeah, at 6:02 p.m. And it was a short outage, so someone in town
Yes,
picked
sir.
it up because it was back on at 6:16, so you're only talking 14 minutes. So someone was on right there in town on call and, re-energized that. But if that was on its normal operation, normally that squirrel would have bumped it one time possibly,
Yes.
max twice. It wouldn't have gone through 3 operations unless that squirrel just ended up laying there completely the whole time.
Exactly.
Usually it would be cleared after one shot.
Barbecue.
Mhm.
So those were the outages for the month.
All right, appreciation letters.
let's see here, oh, only one. All right, so, this was, a service order, to collect fees and reconnect that was done last night, meter blank. She had just wanted to let us know that Robert Sanchez was so nice and helpful last night, and she really appreciates his kindness. So, you know, like I said, we do have employees doing the right thing, and my thing is we don't hear it all the time, but we do hear it. Like I said, a lot of times you read on the postings is the negative. That's not who Felps is. This is who Felps is. That's who Felps is. That's who Felps is. It's not the negativity that you hear on that stuff, because I have never seen that from any employee here. They do the right thing. So, appreciation letter to Mr. Sanchez.
All right, is that it?
That's it.
Any other questions? All right, meeting adjourned.